This morning. It's been a few hours since I've had the pleasure to see Fergie and Keith Leslie. Well, your tweets are that insightful. Good morning, bonjour. Thank you for joining us here today. Well, he certainly doesn't need much introduction. It is a pleasure to introduce our Ontario PC finance critic, Vic Fedeli. Vic is here today to talk about his third annual Focus on Finance book. In his role as finance critic in the legislature, Vic has done an incredible job at holding the Liberal government to account for their misguided economic policies, their ongoing fiscal mismanagement. Every day we hear government's talking points about how great the province is doing financially. But through his hard work and diligence, through his annual Focus on Finance book and his monthly newsletter, he reveals the truth and shines a light on the reality of Ontario's finances, and it isn't pretty. Thanks to Vic, we know the government has created a plan to artificially achieve a balanced budget by next year, a fact confirmed by the Financial Accountability Officer yesterday morning. And we know that Ontario taxpayers will continue to pay for this government's mismanagement. And we've learned that those in the government aren't buying their own spin. Until Ontario's poor financial state is properly addressed, the government will continue to sell off assets, slash funding to healthcare, and raise hydro rates to make up for their scandal, waste, and mismanagement. And now I'll pass it off to Vic and let him share some of his findings. Thank you for coming to hear about this latest Focus on Finance report.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, welcome to our annual Focus on Finance opportunity. This is book number 3, and I know you found number 1 and number 2 scintillating. This promises to be even bigger and better as I'll get to a particular chapter. I want to say thank you to Patrick and congratulations on a great year. This is your 1-year anniversary week, and just so very, very proud of the work that you've done, and especially with your work ethic. It's just been unbelievable to be able to work with you.
I didn't know I got a whole week for our anniversary.
Yeah, you do. Focus on Finance, friends. It's going to provide a deep analysis of Ontario's financing, focusing on the changes since the 2015 budget. As we learned through yesterday's FAO presentation, the government is trying to temporarily balance the budget through one-time sale of assets, only to see the government plunge back into deficit. So the first 14 pages of the book detail exactly how the government structured the sale of Hydro One to use that one-time revenue to bring them closer to balance. Later in the book, we expose in more detail what the FAO alluded to with respect to Schedule 68 of the Cap and Trade Bill. And that's the mechanism they're going to put in, or as of yesterday, they put in place to allow them to use the cap and trade revenue to pay for pre-announced transit and infrastructure. Again, that's all part of the attempt at short-term budget relief. The bulk of the book is a review of what happened throughout Ontario from a financial perspective. It paints a picture of a government mired in waste, scandal, and mismanagement, and I'll focus on a particular chapter at the end of this book right now, which reveals for the very first time Ontario's latest scandal. The 300,000 gas plant scandal documents continue to provide startling revelations about the inner workings of the Liberal government. Remember, these are the documents the government presumed would never, ever be seen by outside eyes. You have been provided copies of the cabinet document marked confidential, not to be copied or reproduced. It pertains to what is commonly known as the Samsung deal. Treasury Board, Management Board of Cabinet note dated March 26, 2013 outlines how the government could have gotten out of the multi-billion-dollar Samsung deal for nothing. That's right, nothing. It notes KC, that's Korean Consortium, has since missed key commitments by missing multiple milestone deadlines for Phase 2 and 3 construction projects. This triggers the province's ability to terminate the GEIA, without penalty, this I'm quoting from the cabinet document, through existing termination clauses. It further states costs for these 3 phases to Ontario ratepayers would have been $5.2 billion over 20 years if contracted. So we could have got out of the deal, the remainder of the Samsung deal, and saved $5.2 billion. But let's go 3 months ahead to June 20th. The government made a grandiose announcement that day that it renegotiated the Samsung deal, and they're saving $3.7 billion of the $9.7 agreement. So the minister claimed a savings of $3.7 billion, yet the ministry's own documents state by canceling all the remaining project they were entitled to cancel at no penalty, the savings would have been $5.2 billion. So to understand how they left $1.5 billion on the table, go back to the Cabinet Office analysis. It's in there as well. And I'm quoting, aside from the Green Energy Act, there is more fundamental question about what Ontario's future electricity needs are and how they should be met. And here's an important phrase. Ontario currently has more generation capacity than it requires, and the ministry presents this as a rationale for not proceeding with the future phases of the Green Energy Act. So they knew they didn't need the power. They knew they could get out of this thing and save $5.2 billion, but they started to waffle. They felt this may conflict with their other messaging that they want to foster renewable energy generation. And I quote, also saying that KC's capacity is not needed could be contentious in communities where other projects, wind farms, are currently being built in the face of community opposition. And that's their perceived dilemma. Once they realized they could have walked away from the deal, they needed to make a decision. Do we do what's best for the ratepayers of Ontario, or do we do what's best for the Liberal Party? And instead of cancelling all $5.2 billion of the remainder of the deal, they canceled the wind portion only and kept a 300 megawatt solar project at a cost of $1.5 billion to the ratepayer. Even though they admit Ontario didn't need the power, even though they were paying an outrageous subsidy, and even though they had the right to walk away free and clear, they chose to proceed with the project. And as a final result, the minister's announcement stated, this was the most significant step our province could take to bend the cost curve for ratepayers, but that is patently untrue. They could have done more. They could have walked away from the deal and saved the ratepayers the full $5.2 billion. So that's one of the breaking stories that's included in Focus on Finance 3, and we're open for your questions. Thank you.
How can you be sure that they could have got out of that? They've told us before that they've got these ironclad agreements where if certain milestones aren't reached that they can just drop a contract. And when they did it with the diabetes registry with CGI, they dropped it and they ended up having to go to arbitration and pay out a lot of money.
Well, there are plenty of pages throughout the gas plant scandal documents that bounce this back and forth, and it is their opinion to cabinet that they can walk away without penalty. Those are their own words. As it appears,
words with the diabetes registry, and then they had to eat their own words.
As it appears, they canceled without penalty all of the wind projects, but they did keep 300 megawatts of solar projects at a cost of $1.5 billion.
When you say they left $1.5 billion on the table, that's what you're talking about?
Yes.
But they're getting something for that, are they not?
300 megawatts of solar. Yeah.
That we don't need.
That they acknowledge we don't need. They acknowledge that. So it appears, when you look through the remainder of the documents, they go back and forth about, we've already told the public we really need that power, or that we really need this type of energy, and although we don't need it, we're going to buy it anyway.
And I guess I'd say what's most egregious about that is if they really thought that they were going to need it, that's one thing. But knowing in advance that it would not be required, then it's purely for political calculations, and Ontario families pay.
Any more questions?
Probably after we read them.
It's always good to be here and present the book. Take your time and go through it. The beginning chapter, the first 14 pages, really paints a picture of a government that realizes at a certain point in time that they're not going to be able to balance the budget. They realize that. They acknowledge that. There's documents, again, from the gas plant scandal that go back and forth that acknowledge that. And basically, this contends that they hatched a plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell these assets. We're going to tell the public it's to buy infrastructure. But we've put a clause in our own bill that allows us to use the Hydro One sale money to pay for infrastructure that we are already budgeted for, and take that already budgeted money and use that to lower the deficit. That's the plan that they hatched, and that's all of, you'll see as you read through this, all of the triggers were released to allow that to happen, and it worked. Worked so well that they're now doing exactly the same thing with the cap and trade money. That's what the Schedule 68 that the FAO continues to talk about.
Vic, sorry, I missed how you got these documents.
Back during the we've had during the gas plant scandal, the last 300,000 document dump. We're still going through them. It's a long, arduous process to go through them, but they were released by the clerk, so they are public documents, even though they say not to be copied or reproduced. They were released just before the last election.
And if there's any follow-up questions after reading this great focus on finance, Vic will be available regularly in a yellow tie to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.